Hi folks, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most dishonest responses to one of my videos that I've ever seen. I'm talking about a video I posted a few days ago debunking Moist Critical's pretty awful response to Alex Pretty's shooting. In that video, I laid out how his take leaned on basically zero facts, relied on assumptions, showed no real legal understanding of the situation, and was driven almost entirely by emotional appeal. Now, Papa Gut decided to respond to that video, and look, Papa Gut is known for his awful takes. You can look at the Caleb Hammer situation, his response to Nick Shirley, or any number of examples. His reputation is shot. No one with any objective understanding of these topics actually respects how he analyzes things. That said, what matters here isn't his history, it's how dishonest this response was. Now, from the very beginning of his video, Papa Gut frames the entire discussion as already resolved, not as a question to be examined. And this is the governing move that shapes everything else he does. He presents the Alex Pretty shooting as a settled moral fact rather than an incident requiring legal or evidentiary analysis. And by doing that, Papa Gut shifts the conversation from what do the facts allow us to conclude to why are you questioning what we already know? And that framing preempts debate entirely. Any attempt to analyze uncertainty, process, or standards is treated as illegitimate by definition. This is how people who are insecure in their opinions shield themselves from criticism, by hiding behind a veil of certainty. And that veil is something Papa Gut leans on constantly. See, a central weakness of his response is his substitution of moral certainty for argument. He repeatedly replaces actual reasoning with declarations. He asserts conclusions like, this was unjustified, or this was an execution, without grounding them in any completed investigative framework. He treats emotional clarity as epistemic clarity, meaning that because something feels morally obvious to him, further scrutiny becomes unnecessary. Now, that position takes zero intellectual effort. It actually requires no curiosity, no reasoning, no engagement with process, and from an argumentation standpoint, it means his response isn't actually a rebuttal at all. It's just a declaration. And as we all know, a declaration cannot refute a claim that's about standards, process, or evidentiary limits. It's really just an emotional reaction dressed up with certainty. Now, taking this a step further, Papa Gut outright rejects the legal framework I present without offering any sort of replacement for it. My argument repeatedly invokes use of force standards, perception under stress, evidentiary incompleteness, and investigation sequencing. I'm appealing to process. I'm appealing to legality and logic. Meanwhile, Papa Gut dismisses all of that as excuses or distractions, but he never proposes an alternative framework. This creates a massive gap wherein he rejects the legal model used to evaluate force, but offers no coherent standard by which force should be evaluated. He essentially says, oh, this is bad, and stops there. That's not analysis, folks. I think that goes without saying. That's not reasoning. That's absolutely nothing. In effect, it's advocating for judgment without any sort of process, which is incoherent in and of itself. And as a result, his position becomes normative but undefined. He knows the outcome he wants, but not the rule by which it's reached. That's like demanding justice while rejecting investigation entirely. Now, it's unsurprising that the same problem shows up in his collapse in temporal reasoning, wherein a reoccurring logical failure in his response is seen through time compression. He argues that once the firearm was removed, it becomes categorically irrelevant. And that completely ignores escalation inertia, the reality that rapidly evolving encounters are evaluated in seconds, not in static snapshots. He's effectively projecting his position, witnessing the event through a third-party video as the only absolute interpretation of the events, completely discounting the experience in the moment through that video. Now, all that said, my claim is about how officers process perceived threat under chaos, not about endorsing outcomes. Papa Gut treats those as equivalent, collapsing analysis into outcome-based reasoning. He puts the cart before the horse, essentially. He wants a specific conclusion without evaluating the variables that led to it. That's basic hindsight bias, judging decisions only from the endpoint instead of from the moment the decisions were made. Now, another major issue is his false exhaustiveness of available evidence. He repeatedly claims that all relevant facts are visible, that video shows everything that matters, and that no additional evidence could change interpretation. Needless to say, that's classic false exhaustiveness. Video evidence is partial by definition, angle, obstruction, perception, all of these matter. Investigations only exist precisely because video alone is insufficient. By asserting completeness prematurely, he shields his conclusion from falsification. This is a classic streamer tactic, by the way, insulating yourself from scrutiny by declaring that the case is closed. We've seen everything we had to see. There's no other conclusion you could arrive at. And needless to say, that's not how the real world works. And by the way, all that said, if you thought it couldn't get any more dishonest, well, I bring you the strawmans. This man just strawmans almost all of my positions. See, my argument focuses on evidentiary limits, legal standards, and caution against absolutist language. Papa Gut reframes that as me defending institutions, minimizing harm, and excusing violence, which is inherently absurd. If anything, I'm arguing against violence. I'm arguing for process, de-escalation, and understanding what went wrong so it doesn't happen again. His constant reframing shifts the dispute from analytical disagreement to just some weird moral alignment, freeing him from actually having to engage with my claims, which is thoroughly dishonest, shall I add. And as always, when the argument fails, like every other streamer and YouTuber, he goes to a genetic fallacy. See, rather than addressing my claims about uncertainty, standards, or narrative absolutism, Papa Gut just jumps straight into motive attribution. He claims I'm biased because of my political alignment. He claims there's a financial incentive, an ideological intent behind what I'm doing. Now look, even if any of that were true, which it isn't, it wouldn't address the truth value of my claims. Attacking why an argument is made instead of whether it's correct is the weakest move you can make in a debate. It's an admission that you can't engage with the substance of what your opponent said. And look, Papa Gut is so insecure and weak in his positions that he then proceeds to the classic cope. He expands the scope. He brings up national politics, institutional history, unrelated actors, broad ideological narratives, none of which have anything to do with my argument. This expansion doesn't strengthen his case. In fact, it just dilutes it. My argument is narrow and methodological. His argument is just broad and moralistic. Needless to say, that's not engagement. That's just clear avoidance. So for anybody at home curious what Papa Gut's debate tactic involves, it's the equivalent of going to a pool and instead of jumping in, just running around it and then leaving and acting like all the sweat on you is from jumping in the pool. Now, all that being said, perhaps his biggest weakness is that his position is non-falsifiable. He claims if investigations disagree, they're corrupt. If evidence complicates the narrative, all of a sudden it's suppression. If uncertainty remains, well, that's bad faith. There's no outcome that could change his conclusion because it's non-falsifiable. Another insulation tactic, which is unsurprising. That's all this guy does. He just sits there and figures out ways to dance around the topic and cocoon himself from actually having to be scrutinized. That's what he's deeply scared of. Having his work scrutinized to a logical degree and being put in a position where he actually has to defend his positions or to argue factually against what's being presented because he knows he can't do either. And look, from a reasoning standpoint, it means that Papa Gut's positions are mostly belief-driven, not actually evidence-driven. And that said, he makes debating with him impossible because disagreement itself is treated as proof of error. How do you prove that someone's belief is wrong when it's not even based on fact? It just harkens to that age-old saying of, you don't argue with fools because people from a distance can't tell who is who. Luckily, we can dismantle what he's saying and show exactly where the line stands. Now look, at the end of the day, Papa Gut's response doesn't function as a counter-argument. He substitutes certainty for analysis. He rejects legal reasoning without any sort of replacement. He reframes methodological critique as moral evasion. He relies on motive attribution instead of evidence. And most importantly, he forecloses falsification entirely. And in doing so, he avoids my central thesis completely, that absolutist narratives declared before investigation undermine clarity, accountability, and good public understanding. And in Charlie's case, that kind of thinking actively disconnects the public from the truth. Needless to say, Papa Gut's video is a great representation of why the left can't argue, they can't debate, and they can't operate grounded in reasoning. That's why they have to operate from a place of emotion. That's one hell of an embarrassing video to keep up. If I were him, I would delete it. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.